We're going to talk about generous living. Generous living. It's really the time of Thanksgiving. So we just want a season of where we just walk through the scriptures together and using our time, talent, and treasure to bless others and glorify God. Again, I also want to just thank Emily and the video and all those that were part of that video. It was very, very touching to my wife and I, and we're very grateful for the family that God's put around here. One of my kids, after seeing that last night, they said, they're like, you know, we're closer to the people living up church than we are to our aunts and uncles and cousins, and that's absolutely true. We have a great family here, and we're thankful for what God's done here. So again, as we think through generous living, first of all, this is just some observations that I have about people that are generous. These are just my views. When I think of someone that's a generous person, there's a couple things that I notice. Generous people seem to have more joy. They seem to have more joy. So when you see someone that's a generous person, they just seem to have more joy. They also seem to have more time. Like they just seem to, people matter to them. What they're doing. When someone is a generous person, again, these are my observations, they seem like they have more time. They seem like they have more joy. They seem to have more peace. Generous people, things will start to happen. The same issues that happen in my life will happen to them, and they just seem like they have a peace about them that a lot of times looking on the outside, like, man, how did you get that? There's a generosity about them. They also, I see a more contentment as well. So they see things, the highs and lows. There just seem to be, there's something even about them through the crisis and difficulty. And so these are just my observations about that. I also think generous people always seem to have more opportunities, right? Like an opportunity will show up, and you just see someone that has a generous mindset. They see it as another opportunity to be a blessing to others and glorify God with their actions, where some people are like, well, I just don't have any opportunities. And so they just find excuses, where a generous person just seems to, they seem to always have something else going on or some great opportunity happening. This is just really, again, an observation. They always seem to have more money. They seem to have more money, more really financial. They just seem like they're just giving. And I've seen that in several different ways. The different people have been very generous to me. And so I've just seen that. And so this is one thing I read. It says, generous people feel better about themselves. They report a greater sense of life satisfaction and happiness, and they build stronger relationships with others. Studies have even linked generosity to improved physical health. Generous people believe that there's more than enough for others. So they don't live in a scarcity mindset. They think there's plenty for everybody. And so when I think of generous living, I want to be a generous person. I want to be a generous person. Some more things about generosity, as we get prepared for this lesson today. A generous person can be anyone. You don't have to be born from the right family. You don't have to have the right backstory. You can be any person. Generous people come from all different walks of life and all different kinds of social economical situations. Generous people have the same amount of time as others, right? Like you'll be with people. There's always those people that feel like they have somewhere else better to go besides with you. Well, generous people seem like, and you know they're busy, but they seem like they have time, and they're like, well, it's time to wrap this up. And you're like, wow, thank you for so much. You're so good to me, But they have a schedule. But there's something about this. Also, generous people put others' needs as a priority. They're looking. I think that's where these opportunities come. They hear an issue, and they're just always, their radar is going. They always have an opportunity in that. And so, again, like I said, I want to be known as a generous person. Again, I think of myself years down the road. I'm starting to get older than I think I am, but the truth is, as I see myself, I don't want to be a crusty, crabby old man that just sits there and complains. Now, this next few generations are really challenging that part of me. But truly, what does that mean? So what, for me, it means to really work through and begin to process, what does it mean to be generous? And so there's a part of me, and I think this goes with anybody, if you're my age or older, as you begin to there's a part of you when you learn something or you know how to do something that you want to hold back so somebody else doesn't mess it up, right? Like there's a part. But generosity pushes against that and makes us say, no, I'm going to trust that they need to grow and they need to learn, and I'm going to trust this process together. And so I just really want to, and I really, honestly, I think all of us would say, no one here, at least I don't think so, would say, I want to be a stingy, crusty old person when I'm, or I want to just be known as a selfish man. Like, that goes absolutely against what Christ has done in my life, what Christ is doing in your life. That just goes against everything. We want to be known as generous. I want my grandkids to think of Grandpa as generous. I want my neighbors. This last year, this has been one of my goals, and we've been very careful not to get ahead of it. But I wanted to be the house on the street that has the big size candy bars for Halloween. In the last 2 years, we've been that people. Like, that's been a goal. And again, we tried to be good stewards. You can do that and go in debt, but we wanted to be good stewards and make sure that we did it in the right way. And so we're the hot chocolate people and the big size candy bars. You're like, where do you live? I'll tell you later. but this idea, and so I just think. And again, this is from my perspective, and this is for me saying for me. I have no excuse not to be generous. You know why? Because I serve a God that's been generous. He gives me, he gives to me, and he gives to me, and he gives to me. I can't speak for you, but I serve a generous God. And so today, as we look in the scriptures, Jesus really gives us a picture, and we want to really hone in kind of our time. I think generosity with our time, talent, and treasures matter. We only have a certain amount of time. I also think as I get older, time begins to really put in perspective, and I realize that time really is my most valuable resource. And so I want to be a good steward of that. So hopefully today you'll walk out of here with a couple things that can help you be challenged by the Word of God and Jesus' great lesson on how to be a generous person. So Luke chapter 10, verse 20, starting in verse 25, says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up and to test Jesus. He wasn't very smart because he was trying to test Jesus, which wasn't a smart decision. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? And he replied, how do you read it? And he answered, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all your strength, and with all of your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he gave an excellent answer. That is incredibly beautifully said. And you have answered correctly, Jesus said. He got a little gold star, and he was so happy. It was impressive. And Jesus replied, do this, and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked, who is my neighbor? And so who am I to be generous to is what we could ask today. Who am I to be generous to? Well, Jesus, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down to Jerusalem to Jericho, and maybe you've heard this story of the Good Samaritan, when he was attacked by robbers and stripped him of his clothes and beat him and went away and leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So just a good priest there, right? Well, so too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him, and he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on the oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to him who fell into the hands of the robber? The expert of the law replied, the one of who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. And so really, we really see a great picture of generosity in this passage. We see this man, so 3 individuals. So here's some lessons I want you to take from this. So there's a screen. The next slide tells us, so there's 5 things we can take from this, okay? The opportunity was available to all of them. So a priest and a Levite, a priest was a person that was to speak for God and man. Well, he saw the guy that was beat up, robbed. He was in a bad situation, and he's like, whoo, and goes to the other side. Now, I want to give a little bit, maybe because I'm speaking for the ministers in the house, right? Whatever. Maybe he had a legitimate need or thing to go, but the opportunity was still there, right? It was still there. And so maybe you say, well, I would be more generous if I had a position that put me there. Well, we'll talk. We saw that doesn't really matter because the Samaritan, to the expert of the law, the guy would have seen him as somebody that was really a half Jew, half Gentile individual. They had no respect for Samaritans. For a Samaritan to do this would be like a drug dealer doing it in our days. Guy that's selling drugs to junior high kids and now doing this, they'd be like, no, this is the kind of person that was showing hospitality in this context. And so the opportunity is available to all of them. So we can learn from that. Listen, their opportunities are there, and we see it. They both all three of them saw the guy laying there, but one of them responded to this with a generous heart. So that guy saw what others were avoiding. If you want to be generous, and I believe you do, that you have to begin to start to see what other people avoid. You have to start to listen what other people ignore, right? So he saw, and I love what it says. It said he had pity on him. It said he took pity on him. Man, he just saw somebody hurting, and he listened to that. And it was an opportunity for him to use his time, talent, and treasures to be a blessing to somebody else. And so we see that. Not only that, he did what was right. Like, again, if the priest went there and it's like, man, I was late. I was almost late. There was a guy laying there half dead, robbed, but don't worry, I went around him to the other side. He definitely lived in a day where there was no cameras or social media, right? Because today there'd be a lot of backlash for that. This guy saw an opportunity and just came down and said, I'm going to do what's right. What's right. And then I love this. He used his resources that he had available. He used his resources. It's always interesting to me, again, maybe just being around church folks and being around church people, is a lot of times they want other people, so they'll let me know of a need that they saw, and I'm like, but you saw the need. How are you going to step into that? This guy didn't say, you know what, I should probably call my pastor. This person is half dead laying there. He needs to do something about this. He didn't call, no, what did he do? He saw the need, and he used his own donkey. He used his own resources. He took time and he used his own medicine. He spent his own money. He was generous with all of that. He took the initiative in this moment. He was willing to be generous when others were not. He was willing. So the first question for me when someone asks or there's an opportunity isn't like, man, maybe the church should do this, or maybe somebody else I know that's got different resources situation. No, the first question, because if I see the opportunity, God is asking me to step in to this opportunity. I love that. He used his resources. I love how he even walked away. He's like, hey, he gave the innkeeper some instructions. He's like, listen, he took this responsibility. He owned it. We talk about owning your faith. He owned the situation like he was in charge. All he happened to be is walking down the road where a guy got robbed and beat up. But he saw the opportunity. He took it onto himself. He said, no, I'm going to help take this on. He's like, listen, if there's more expense occurred than I expect, I'm going to take that. This guy was a generous man. He was a generous man. And then I love this management of time. And I think a lot of times when it comes to being generous, we talk about money, we talk about gifting or talent, but our time, how do we use our time? This guy obviously he had somewhere to go. They all did. So if I was just going to think like the Levite and the priest, they both had things, they had obligations. They probably had somewhere to be. They were obviously traveling down the road. They were at point A and they were trying to go to point B, but here came this opportunity that none of them knew that was on their agenda. But what they did is, what this one guy did, this Samaritan, this good Samaritan, he was willing to adjust his time. He was willing to really put in he made some arrangements. There was people waiting for him. There was something he had to be doing, but he took time to take care of it. Why? He showed generosity. He was living a generous life. Man, what a blessing. What amazing story. And so as we use our time, talents, and treasures to bless other and glorify God, he did such a great job. It didn't say this was a parable. It says this was a story. Jesus himself The Son of God recognizes his actions as good and right. And he says, hey, not only that, go and do likewise. He commands to go and do likewise. And so today, again, that kind of gives us a general idea. And man, what a beautiful picture. And it really makes me want to begin to think through, how can I be more generous? And specifically, how can I be more generous with my time? You know, there's certain things I do around the church because I work here, right? And so there's also things that I want to do because I want to serve God and I want to be generous with my time. I want to be known personally as a generous individual. I want to be known that people think, man, you should go talk to Shawn. That guy loves people and loves God. He's got time for you. Why? Because God has been so generous to me. I can't speak for you, but I can speak for me. And I can say, listen, God has been so good and so generous and so generous and so generous. I don't deserve the goodness that God has done. Even if I was to lose it all today, I can't say that that God hasn't been generous to me. And so here's 4 things I want us to begin to think through. 4 things, and we're just about done. Number 1, be present. If you're going to be generous, you gotta live in the now. And this really steps on my toes in a way, because we live in a generation that we have technology that we don't have to be present anymore. We don't. If you want to make a life-changing decision, commit today. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be in the moment I'm in at that moment. And that means in good news, in bad news, in sad news, or glad news, I'm going to be in the moment. This guy had an agenda, he had a plan, he had a direction, he was going somewhere, he was doing something, and all of a sudden this opportunity came, and the present situation gave him a moment that he could be remarkable to a person that could give him nothing. The guy was broke, he was beat up, and he was just left for dead, and this guy stepped in a way. Why? Because he wasn't on a cell phone. He wasn't thinking about what he was going to do today. He was thinking about this moment was here. Again, there was one time I was in line, and there was a police officer in front of me, and I got that moment, that thing, you should buy us coffee. And I waited like 2 seconds too long, and I blew it. Ugh, why? Because I wasn't present. And again, there was somebody with me, and I thought I should do it. And this is one thing my wife taught me years ago that she learned from another lady. She said, if you feel where you should do something good for somebody, you should do it right away, because it's usually probably the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God is working on you to do it, because we are selfish individuals. We're selfish, right? And he's like, no, I'm not. Let me take things away from you, and you'll be like you're selfish. I'm guarantee you. I could get the right thing the right way. You tell me what you really want, and I'll give it to the person you hate the most. And you'll be like, you'll be mad, right? Because we're selfish. Let's just be honest. We don't teach kids not to be selfish, right? So we don't teach them to be selfish. They're just selfish. It's their time, their energy. So we know that. Let's just be honest. It'll help you out, okay? So take a deep breath. I'm selfish, okay? So we know that. And so the way to do that is really to be present and to begin to think about other people. He took that. He was present. He was present. Number 2, account how and where you're spending your time. I think this would be a great thing for all of us to do. Is this next week, just make a little log of where you spend your time. How much TV time? How much time do you spend doing all these great things that you think that, and how many, again, I won't make you ask, but all of us feel super extreme crazy busy. But let's just think through, where are we using our time and resources? And how are we using that? And again, I think as God has given me a lot of time, there's a day that God brought life to me, and there'll be an end of this day. There'll be a point when this is all over. And I'll give an account how I use my time, talent, and treasure. And so I think there's a limited amount of time I have to do and follow what God has called me to do. And so I want to begin to think through, how am I using God's time? I'm going to be a good steward. I have a certain amount of time here, and I want to use it for the glory of God as best I can. I want to bless others and use it to the glorify of God the best I can, so I'm going to do it. And then I think number 3, put buffers into your schedule so you can be flexible. Put some buffers. We are like metal to metal. mechanic, right? Brake reference. Metal to metal in the way we do. We end one meeting, we jump into another. We do this, we go to another, right? We give no barrier, no space, no time. We're just one thing after another. I joke with my wife and I was like, we'll have 5 minutes on a calendar. We're like, we got free time. Let's cram something else in it, because we just go so much. And so just really begin to think through how you do it. And this is probably one of the growth moments for me this last 8 years, really helped me a lot, is I found that the people that are the most focused with their time, they've given a good account. They know where they spend their time and what they're spending their time on, accomplish far more and are the most generous with their time. It's opposite. You think someone that just free, doesn't have anything to do, their schedule's loose and that, the more focused you are, the more accountability you put into your schedule, the more freedom you have. And again, I think if we were to do an audit, there's actually a study that most Americans think they work 20 hours more than they actually do. And you say, how much do you work? Well, I work 50, 60, 70 hours. That's like 20 hours too high. Why? Because I think we waste a lot of time. And again, so I really think that this would be helpful. Again, I know this is stepping on toes, but imagine if God's people here this morning was to be present, was to count where they're spending their time, and put some flexibility, some buffers in their time, how we could be like this guy that's super generous with and help those that are in need and hurting. And then finally, number 4, look and listen for opportunities. I've been in conversations, and myself and somebody else, and I'll leave there, and I'm like, whew, glad that's over. And they're like, man, they'll have like 5 things that they can now use or do to help that person out. That's because they're looking and they're listening. I know that Levite and that priest, and again, I'm not trying to badmouth them or whatever, but for whatever reason, their constraints, they were not looking for somebody. And what would have been really beautiful, I'm glad Jesus didn't show us this, but if that priest went to church and started to teach on how to give time, how to use or how to bless other people at that moment when he had an opportunity to actually live out what he said he could do. There's a point where we got to start to look and listen. And this isn't about going to church or doing the things for church. This is about your own life. And are you willing to live a generous life? Are you willing to step out and say, okay, God, what is it that you have for me to do? One thing I love about that guy, too, he couldn't do it all. Notice he told the innkeeper, he's like, hey, you take care of him. I got some stuff to do. So he delegated what he took this opportunity, and then he compensated the guy to take care of the job that he had created. And so he was willing to take full responsibility of that opportunity. And so what we walk away from is, man, that guy blessed that individual and was a blessing. You know what Jesus said at the end of that lesson? He says it in verse 37 of chapter 10. Go to the next slide. Let me read it together. It says, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. We're to go and do likewise. We're to be present. We're to look and listen for opportunities. And the truth is, I always think of this. If Jesus was to come beside me and say, let's look back at the last week you just had, and let's see all the opportunities you just walked by, And some of us here this morning probably is like, man, God, I want you to truly use me. Use me in a mighty way this week. Use me. Like, Lord, give me something. Just give me some meaning and purpose. I guarantee you that we probably walked away from more opportunity than we could ever imagine or think. And so as we challenge, and again, the why behind this, what is the reason? I think that the thing for me is I want to be a generous individual. And the reason why I can want that is because not only has God been generous to me, there are many, many, many people. And I'll tell you about a couple. When I first got called into ministry, this guy, he's actually Mike Geddes. He was a mechanic. He's passed. He's with the Lord now. He was on a very tight income, very, very tight income. And so when I always think about anything I do for God, I think about their investment to me. I remember when they gave me a card, and they didn't have very much money at all. I opened that card up, and I was getting ready to go to seminary, and they said, Pastor Shawn, and I wasn't a pastor at that time. It's like, Pastor Shawn, we're so proud of you. We love you, and we want to invest into your ministry. and had a $20 bill there. And I think about, man, I want to live a life where I can honor them because they have trusted me to be what God called me. And what Sharon did, she actually taught me to read. I graduated high school and couldn't read very well. And so we were in the basement of that church, and she invested in me individually. She sacrificed. She was generous. Can you imagine an 18, 19-year-old kid coming, learning how to, and she was patient with me, and I'd misspell words, and she'd chuckle, and she would fix it, help me. She really didn't say fix me, but she helped, she tried. Only the Lord could do that, right? But I'm just telling you, they're one of many, many, many people that have poured into me. Why? Because they had to? Because they chose to be generous. And so I think what a great challenge would be is to maybe this next month is to begin to think through of all the people, especially if you're having a hard time being generous, think of all the people that have loved you and listened to you and helped you and encouraged you and challenged you along the way. And maybe you'll have opportunity. I don't have time. I won't be able to talk to Mike because Mike's in heaven now. But I can honestly say, and Mike actually introduced me to a guy that I learned how to plumb from. So Mike introduced me to Larry. So, he invested. And so I love this story. I love this idea. And again, I want us to think through. So again, maybe today you're here and you just feel you just need, I want to encourage you and I want to let you know. One other part of this story that helps me is I was the guy that was beaten up and broken and alone. And Jesus stopped and took care of me. He gave me hope and purpose and direction. He was kind enough to me on August 3rd of 1997 to convict my heart that I was a sinner, that the direction I was going in my life was a dead end. And he stopped, and he I'm telling you, I don't know how it did it, but I gave my life to Jesus, and he changed my life from the inside out. And then what I realized, as I learned later, is that he did it 2,000 years before I was even thought of or born. And he provided a way for me. Why? Because he loved me. And he has a plan for me. And he has a plan, and he loves you today. So today, if you do not know Jesus, and maybe you're saying, man, I've been coming to church for a little bit, but I don't know if I have this relationship that you speak of. Man, I will be in the back there. And I would love to talk to you about the generous God that loved me so much, that died on the cross for me and gave me hope and peace and joy, that I can now be generous. That is my source of my generosity, is what he's done. So as we live out this generosity throughout this community, help us. God, help me to be a generous person. Let's pray. Jesus, we love you. We are so, so grateful for your generosity and kindness. We're so grateful for your love. We ask you, God, that you would help us to show that generosity to other people. We'll give you all the praise and all the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.